Hello, let's talk about the great new features in version 1.3 of Volumator. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. There's improvements to existing things, there's bug fixes, and there's a whole suite of new features for you to play with. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the height nudges. So over on the edit panel here, we can modify the top and bottom of the volume very quickly and easily with these buttons here. So you simply select whether you're adjusting the bottom or the top. I use the word base because it's less characters. And then these buttons will then apply to whatever it is you have selected here. So let's select our volume here. We've got a volume that's covering most of the map. And for whatever reason, I want to lower it down to this point here. And so we're going to specify that we want to adjust the top, and we're going to reduce it until we get it where we want it to. Like this. And it's really that simple. And if at any point you want to reset it to the originally detected height, press reset, and there we go. And again, we can do the same thing with the bottom. So let's switch to base, and then we're going to bring up the base. And you can see there'll be a point where you start getting errors because those are detected points when the volume was originally built. So it really quickly and easily allows you to see what you're doing and whether or not you're going to have problems. So it's a really fast, rapid way to adjust volumes, and it will come in really handy with combining volumes that are separated by height. So in version 1.2, we added the ability to separate combined volumes. So that means that you could take two volumes, combine them together, and then they act as a single volume. But then later on, you could separate them back out, make edits to the individual volumes, and then recombine them again. So it's great for multi-layered compound volumes where you need different shapes and different areas. But unfortunately, it was only limited to two volumes. Well, now we can support as many volumes as you want to throw at it. As long as they intersect, that's always just the only condition. So let's just do we'll do a nice simple version to keep it quick. So we've got a strange shape here, just bear with me, but it's 4 stories, and we're going to make this a single volume that hopefully fairly accurately reflects the shape. I am doing pretty coarse volumes here, so they will have problems, but it will build them really quickly. And there are our 4 volumes. And if I select them all, and as long as they're intersecting, and of course we can check that in the report, when we go over to edit, we go to combine, we'll see that we are now a single volume that is combining all 4 of them. And if we look at the components of the single volume, we can see that there are 4 data components, and that's the data that was used to create the 4 separate volumes. So if we hit separate, we can see that our 4 volumes are back again. So let's say that we want to make some adjustments to it. So let's edit the vertices on this. We're going to add a little spike sticking out here. I'm going to commit that. And then for this one, we will make wildly coarse, like that. And then we'll combine them back together here. And you can see now that if I show selected, you can see that there is on our 3rd floor, you can see here's our spike, and then on the top floor, it is a lot coarser than the others. And so we can do that as many times as we like. We can combine and separate, make edits. Like I said, the only condition is that the volumes have to intersect. And that's where, if you're having problems with that, that's where our handy nudge buttons for the height is. So it's often the height that's the problem. So in the case where, for example, let's say this volume here wasn't quite high enough, maybe it was down here. It's now easy, obviously, to just do that. And now this will easily combine together, where previously it wouldn't have because it wasn't intersecting with the other 3. So yeah, this is great. So you now have much more tools to combine and separate, and the ability to easily ensure that the height is going to work well together. And you have total flexibility with a number of volumes. And yeah, it's a really good system. And that leads me to the next feature. So all of this work on combining and separating volumes has been leading towards giving depots the ability to build combined volumes. And so that means you can use the depot system to generate really complicated compound volumes that cover difficult and complicated topography of a level with different floors and things like that. So let's have a little look at the example of how it would work. So I've got a level here. We have a barrier here, so that will be a separate area. But this is all one big area here. We've got a little section down here. We have a different floor up here, and then this bit's different up here. So it's a little bit complicated, but we want to build this in one volume that is depot controlled, so that way we can do things like run tests and rebuild it if anything changes. So we'll have a depot there, and we'll add another one here. And I think that should do it. And so how does this new system of combining work? Well, you obviously have to tell the depots that they need to combine their volumes. So we select the depots that we want to be combined, and then we just say add to group. And it's the groups that determine which depots are going to build combined volumes. So when we click that, you'll see that the depots now say the group number underneath. And you'll also notice that there's a button that's appeared here that will tell you any groups that exist. And then if you click it, it will cycle through each of the depots within the group. You'll also notice that it's selected all of the depots in the group as well. So the idea being that you could be like, oh, okay, I want to build group 1. Just click group 1, press start selected depots, and off it goes. So the first depot will build, and then the second one will build, and it will combine them together. And if we select volume and show selected, you can see that we have a single unified volume here that has been created by the two depots. Now, of course, we can do the usual stuff that we could do before. We can go to the edit screen, we can separate the volume, we can massively change the resolution if we want, and then we can select them both again and recombine them, and the depots are still aware of them. Everything remains. I've done a lot of work on making the system very robust, and it should work. Now, the only caveat, like I've mentioned a million times with combined volumes, is that they have to intersect, they have to overlap. Now, the system is smart enough so that if you have a ton of different depots at different floors and they're run out of order, so it does the top and then the bottom and then the middle, it will still combine them correctly. It does a really good job of trying to figure all that stuff out. But it's sort of on you to make sure that the volumes that each depot build will intersect in some form. But as long as you're using them sensibly where the sort of system would expect them to be, then it should work just great. And of course, the system will tell you if there's a problem, and we can look at that right now. So let's look at this example here. We've got a contiguous space that we want to be a single volume, but it's two floors that are quite different shapes, and we want it to be built and tested by depots. So we're going to add a depot on this floor, we'll add a depot on this floor, we'll select them both, add to group, and off we go. So as there's no ceiling here, it's just going to use the current volume height setting to determine how high to make each volume. Now, if we select the volume and show selected, you can see that our volume has correctly built the shape. Wonderful. But let's start again, and this time we're going to move this depot up quite high, and we're going to move this one quite low, and we'll try running it again, and we'll see what happens now. Just like before, it's making each volume the same height as it was previously. Now, this time, you can see that there are two volumes that have been created, and we can see in the status report here, it said it's finished running two depots, but one of them failed to combine, and they're separate. You should probably try and resolve this. Depots that failed to combine, and this is the one that didn't combine. Now, I mean, in this case, there's only two depots, but if there were a ton of depots, you'd be able to identify which is the problem one. And of course, you can find which volume is associated with the depot by just pressing select volume. And if you have a depot selected with this button, it will jump to the depot's volume. Anyway, we know that this volume didn't combine with the other, and it's because it's just not overlapping. It's very close. But if we select both volumes and we can go to the report, we can see that they don't intersect. Another thing that we can do is go to the depot report, and we can see that these two depots are in group 1, but they've not created a combined volume. And you can see that in the status here, it says it failed to combine. So there's loads of ways that you can fix this. Of course, you could just delete the volume and move the depot down a little bit in this case. But another thing that we could do is we could just use our fancy editing buttons that we used before, go to base, and I tell you what, let's select both of them, go to show selected. It makes it a little bit easier. Oh, it's so close. And we'll just nudge it down 25. And if we want to know whether or not they do intersect, of course, again, we can go to report, and now we can see that they do. So we can just combine the volumes, and we're all good again. And if we want to, again, we can go back to the depot report. This hasn't updated because the depot hasn't actually run, but we can see that they are showing up as combined now, so that is good. So if I was to select group 1 again and start the depots, you can see that the test's completed and everything's good. So if we go back to the depot report, we can see that the test is complete, passed validation. So only one of the depots has a volume, and that is this one here. And you can see that this one instead says its volume got combined into location volume 2, which is this here. So yeah, the combines, separate, the groups, and of course the new height tools here, they all work together really nicely to build a pretty comprehensive system for building complicated compound volumes that can be controlled by depots. So let's use our 4-story example case here to show off how rebuilds work on grouped depots. So let's create a depot per floor. Now, in this case, there is no ceiling, and so usually the height of an area is detected. But in this case, there's no ceiling, so it will just use the volume height here. So as long as our depots are within this sort of range, then they should combine okay. Of course, we've got to select them all, add to group, and then start them. Great, and we have our single volume here, and as you might have heard from the sound, it looks like it's going to fail tests because there are 5 warnings. As always, our validation settings specify what our thresholds are. So we've set our threshold to 0. So if there's any warnings, then a depot will get rebuilt. And we can see right here that this one has. So what happens when we run just this one depot here is it will fire out a tester. The tester will fail because there's too many warnings. And then it will split apart. It will separate the volume into the multiple parts. And it will rebuild just the one that's failed. And then it will recombine back to a single volume again. As always, the best way to ensure that volumes are in a good state is to enable validation. So if we set the resolution to be quite coarse, and then we enable validation, we're going to run the depots, and you'll see each volume will do a validation pass, like little yellow dots that show up there. And so each floor here should now have 0 warnings and errors, and we can check that here. You see, can't see any there. We can run depot reports, and you can see there's no warnings or errors. And of course, if we just run depots again, with any luck, we won't get any warnings or errors, and everything's great. And just to wrap up the depot group stuff, as I mentioned before, you add depots to a group by selecting them like this, and then add to group. If there's one already in a group, let's say we select these 3. Now, these 2 are already in a group. We can see that by looking at it. But this one isn't. If we add to group, any that aren't in the group will get added. So this one will get added to group 1. If we come over to here and we create completely new depots like this, and just have those 3 selected, and then add to group, it won't get added to the other group because none of them are selected. So they get added to their own group, which is group 2. So now we have group 2 on this one and group 1 on here. So it should be really straightforward. And these numbers will fill up as you add more groups to your level like this. And so it's a really easy way to jump around. And you can see as I click the group buttons, the appropriate depots are selected on the right there, which means you can just start them really easily. Lastly, there's the select group button. If you just want to select a depot group without knowing what number is, just press select group and it will just automatically select all of the depots that are in whatever that group is. And if you are curious, if you select the depot itself, you can see that the group number is just a variable here. And so you can manually change this if you want, although it's best not to fiddle with it, obviously, unless you know what you're doing. And a new depot is set to group 0, and that basically just doesn't count as a group. Okay, and that is depot groups. So in the testing panel, we now have the ability to specify whether we want to test for any volume of the current class or the specific selected volume when we start the test. So previously, testing on this panel here would have used any volume of class. And what that means is when the test is running, either the piloting or the drone, it's firing rays out. And if each of those rays is actually inside any volume of whatever the current class is, then it's considered good. And you can always tell what the current class is by going to generation settings in advance. And here we're looking at location volumes. So the problem with that, of course, is that maybe your volume doesn't actually cover the space, but another volume of the same class does cover that little hole. Then the testers wouldn't have shown that as a warning. And that could be a potential problem that you want to be aware of. So let's have a look at this little area here. We're going to select the volume that we're in, and we're going to show selected. So you can see that we have our volume here and covers this room fairly well. And we have a barrier here, so we don't care about what's on the other side of here, but there's no barriers here. And as you can see, our volume doesn't come into the elevators here. And let's say that it should have. We actually wanted the volume to reach this. And previously, any volume of class, we could have run the test here, and it wouldn't have shown up as an error. And the reason for that is because we have two other volumes that are of the same class that are covering the elevator. So when we run our test here, it's not showing up any errors here because as long as every area is covered by a location volume, then we're happy. And so no warnings, no errors, everything's great. But let's select our volume again. Let's now specify that we want to check just the selected volume. And now when these testers run, they're going to check, is this specific volume covering it? So I'll run a pilot again, and you can see that immediately it's like, oh, yeah, these areas here aren't covered by that volume. And there we go. And you can see them here, obviously, and we've got our little readout here and here. So this can be really useful when you just want to be really sure that this specific volume is covering all of the areas we can get to in the event that you're worried about maybe overlapping volumes or whatnot. The depot testers, when they run, they'll always check for the specific volume that's associated with the depot. And so effectively, that functionality is now just been pushed to the manual testers here. And so you can specify whether or not you're testing for selected volumes only or just any volume of class. So it's up to you. A user requested feature was the ability to add additional volume classes as barriers. So what that means is that you can specify other volume classes that will also be used to block detection and drones. So in this case here, we've got a room that we want to capture, and it's got a few doorways that we want to block off. So we'll come in and add a barrier here just to block this off. But when we come over here, we'll see, oh, look, there's already a volume of a different class here. It's a kill Z volume, and for whatever reason in our game that these are always used in these kind of places. And to save us having to also build barriers over this, we can just say, oh, I also want this volume class to be used as barriers. So you can see that we have a new setting here called additional barrier classes. And so we can just add in as many as we want here, and they will be used by the barrier system. So in this case, this is a kill Z volume. And so any of these volume types will be used as if they were just normal barrier volume classes during detection and when the drones are flying around. And over here we have another one. This is a different type. This is a blocking volume. Again, let's say that in our game that we only place these in exactly the same places we would place barriers, in which case we can also just add that. Oh yeah, and over here, this is just a barrier plane. And over here is a barrier volume that I created earlier. So now all of our entries and exits are covered. And so we can just build with a drone. You can see that it's kind of lit up a little bit here to show us that these volumes are being used as barriers. And you can see here that it has worked perfectly and it hasn't flown out the door because these volumes are of the classes that we've specified in our additional barrier classes. So that's basically all it does, is that it allows you to input other volume classes. When you build a barrier volume, it will still use the standard barrier volume class. This is the one that is built, but it's also used just like these are for detection. And of course, barrier planes and barrier fences can be used too. So this is very helpful for complicated projects where you've got a ton of different volume classes that are used in different ways that you can use to block detection. And finally, there's a bunch of productivity and general improvements throughout. Let me just show off a couple of things here. So I've got an empty depot. Let's just quickly build something here. So now we have a volume and a depot. Previously, if you just press the select volume button, it will select either the volume you're in or the closest volume. But now, if you have a volume selected and you press select volume, it will check to see if the volume belongs to a depot, and then it will select the depot. And so when you have a depot selected and you press select volume, it will obviously jump to the volume belonging to the depot. So you can effectively toggle between the depot and the volume really easily here. And of course, if you want to select the closest depot, you can just press select depot and it will do that too. So with all these buttons here, you can easily jump around and find things as you need to. And lastly, the other thing I wanted to show off was the improvements to the presets. So if you recall, on version 1.2, I added the ability to load and save presets. And these are data asset files that are the same as the default settings. This is what's loaded when the widget is opened. And these can just be loaded and saved as needed for different scenarios. So if we go to the Volumator folder and into resources, you'll see that now there's a presets folder. And there's a few presets I've created here for different scenarios. And since recording this video, I've created a lot more presets, so version 1.3 will ship with 13 different presets for different setups and scenarios. And if we open any of these up, let's say the voxel one, you can also see that there's been a notes variable added with some information here. And so you can read up about what the different presets do. And of course, you can make your own and you can name them whatever you want and add notes to document exactly what their purpose is. And so let's say, for example, I want to load the voxel preset, and then we're going to start it off again. And as I mentioned, we can switch between the depot and the volume. We're going to show selected, and there is our voxelized preset. Great. So there's a bunch of other features and improvements throughout, bug fixes and all sorts of little great stuff behind the scenes there. Of course, keep your feature requests coming. I will be supporting this for as long as people ask for things. Great. Thanks for your time, and sorry this video was so long.